Leonis is an unlucky demon who got his meat beat in by the heroes, so he reincarnates himself into the future to take revenge. However, instead of taking revenge, all he found was baddies to clap.
Pretty please?
Everything began 1,000 years ago when Leonis and his fellow heroes, Arakel the Great Sage and St. Tyrus, went on a mission to slay some monsters in a town. Arakel had a nut plan to slay the monsters using a high-level spell which would not only affect the monsters but also the people. However, that wasn't an issue because Tyrus had the power to restore lives, and he instructed her to do just that once all the monsters were gone. When he began forming his spell, both the monsters and the people began melting, but Leonis couldn't bear to watch this inhuman act and cut Arakel's spell in half. He then went on to act like a true hero and engage the monsters, causing the people to cheer him on as he did this, while the bitter duo were displeased and the Dumbledore knockoff said it was only a matter of time before Leonis's power would help him dig his own grave. 4 years later, Leonis visited a village on the orders of the crown to help the people slay a monster that had been troubling them. However, after he arrived at the supposed location of the monster, he was attacked by mages who used their magic to prevent him from moving. Some soldiers then came out of hiding and bound him in chains which they pulled on to suspend him in the air. As Leonis struggled to break free, a group of soldiers picked up spears and stabbed him with them. They only brought him down when they were sure he was dead, and as they walked away, they said he wouldn't have met such a fate if he hadn't gone against their master. They left his body there, and as it began to rain, the goddess Roselia approached him. She said it was cruel what happened to him, and asked if he wasn't angry that he'd been betrayed by the people he trusted the most, to which Leonis replied that he wasn't. So she asked if he truly believed that the world was just, and he told her that it made no difference as humans did what they did to survive. Roselia expected his goody two-shoes answers and then asked if he was willing to join her and rebel against the world. Sometime later, Leonis, now a demon lord, returned to his castle after a battle to see Roselia and inform her that they had defeated their enemy. After he presented her with the loot he sweat from the battlefield, he told her about Blackus and how they had become friends. Roselia congratulated him on his victory and his new friendship and told him that she was going to reward him. This reward turned out to be the holy sword he wielded when he was still a hero, but Roselia tweaked it. She said a holy sword no longer suited, and what she would give him would be a demon sword. Right before his very eyes, she changed the sword to a demon sword, but before giving it to him, she told him that he must meet a condition if he wanted to draw the sword. This condition, as she explained, would require the sword to call his truth into question, and unless he proved himself, he'd never wield it. A few years later, the remaining 6 heroes declared war on Leonis, who was now known as the Undead King. While his skeletal army did its best to hold back the humans and the heroes, Leonis was informed by Sherry, his female Alfred Pennyworth, and his wolf friend Blackus, that the strongholds of the other 7 demon lords had fallen and theirs was the last one standing. From his magical orb, Leonis saw that the attack was being led by 3 heroes, Arakel, St. Tyrus, and the Serpent Lord Gisark, and he became enraged. However, when he summoned his staff so he could go out and face them, Blackus advised him against it. He reminded him that he was the last demon lord remaining and said the goddess Roselia wouldn't wish for him to perish there. Seeing the wisdom behind Blackus's words, Leonis decided the best course of action was to seal himself away until he could be reincarnated and fulfill the mission the goddess gave him. 1,000 years later, Roselia and her trusty sidekick Regina visited the underground ruins of Leonis's castle to investigate the void nest there. As they went deeper into the ruins, they came across a sealed door with ancient markings, so Roselia decided to search the online archives to decipher the message. Regina wasn't as interested in the sealed door, so she went off to explore another part of the ruins. Just as she left, Roselia touched the markings and to her utmost surprise, the door opened as if cueing the start of a horror movie. Inside the room, touches lit up, and when she cautiously walked in to check out the place, her mana counter overloaded and stopped working. Roselia wondered why that happened. When there were no voids around, however, she became more intrigued by the giant crystal when she noticed someone was inside it. At the same time, Cultured Bro was dreaming of the goddess Roselia. It was more of a memory than a dream, and in it, Roselia told him that she would be reincarnated 1,000 years from that day in the form of a human child. Leonis's duty was to find her when that happened, and she urged him not to forget it. The next moment, he opened his eyes to find Roselia trying to break his crystal sleeping chamber open. Mistaking her for a grave robber, he decided to teach her a lesson for disturbing his slumber and broke the crystal. The spell sent Roselia flying and knocked her unconscious, so when Leonis got closer to her, he became stunned by her beauty and wondered why the animators spent all the budget on her face. As he stared at her like a creep, she regained consciousness and asked what a child was doing in such a place, making him wonder if she hit her head too hard. Nevertheless, He turned to look at his reflection, and that's when he realized that his reincarnation had failed as he'd been reincarnated back to his human form.
No! God, please, no! No!
He was still having a mini breakdown about his looks when Roselia began fussing over him like a mother hen and tried to check for injuries on his body. When she found none, she hugged him to her chest and promised to take care of him as his big sister. Leonis felt her actions were disrespectful towards an undead king like him. However, he couldn't help but like the feeling of her melons against his face.
Nice.
A few moments later, he blacked out, and when he woke up again, Roselia fed him some of her food rations as it was hunger that caused his new frail body to shut down earlier. While he ate, Roselia introduced herself to him and said she was a swordswoman in training and a member of the 18th Platoon at the 7th Assault Gardens Excalibur Academy. Of course, everything she said aside from her name sounded like a brood, explaining her life goals to a one-night stand, but he listened and only told her his name. Roselia became intrigued to know how he'd gotten to that place and asked if he'd been dragged down there by a void. Confused, Leonis asked what a void was, so she explained that they were the enemies of humanity which suddenly appeared 64 years ago. She added that she'd come to the ruins to investigate as void outbreaks were common in places like that. As Leonis listened to her, they heard an explosion and Regina contacted Roselia to inform her that she'd engaged a colossal void. The next moment, the room began to shake. So without any hesitation, Roselia tackled Leonis to the ground, acting as a disposable meat shield. Just as she assured him that she'd protect him, a void broke through the wall and Roselia identified it as an ogre-class void, which surprised Leonis as he knew Shrek was obviously more charming than them. Roselia ordered him to stay behind her and began shooting at the creature, but its body was harder than you inside your favorite sock, so the bullets didn't penetrate. Leonis tried to intervene, as he didn't appreciate the misconstructed ape desecrating the place his comrades lay, but his feet got caught in his cloak and he fell. While he cursed himself for having little legs, Regina showed up and blasted the void's arm off. She blasted it a few more times before coming to stand with them and asking Roselia where she'd found one of Peter Pan's lost boys. Roselia promised to explain everything once the void was taken care of, so Regina asked Roselia to take Leonis and run, assuring them that she could handle the void alone. Believing in her friend's capabilities, Roselia took Leonis and fled the room, which he didn't like as he wasn't a spineless wimp. However, he recognized that he was out of his depth, and until he could learn more about the New World Order, he had to parade himself as a pitiful weakling. Just before they reached the exit, a Wyvern-class void showed up and blocked their path. Roselia asked Leonis to run as she intended to fight the void, but he refused and decided to help her. Unfortunately, before he could complete the spell, Roselia pushed him out of the way to save him from the void's attack, getting herself hit in the process. As she lay dying in a pool of her blood, two more voids showed up, so she weakly pleaded with Leonis to leave her and run. Leonis ignored her words as he tried to understand why she'd foolishly risked her life to save his. Seeing her that way made him recall the day he died and was brought back by the goddess Roselia. The voids tried to attack him, but thanks to his limitless ability, he was spamming aura even more than Gojo. However, he became pissed that they had evicted Roselia from life before he could get more information about the world from her, so he decided to teach them a lesson. Using his magic staff, he used a gravitational and fire spell to slay the voids. He then turned his attention back to Roselia's lifeless body and used his magic to revive her, because he felt grateful that she willingly died for him. As her body returned to normal, a mark appeared on her thigh, making him wonder if she'd forgive him for what he'd done. Just then, he heard Regina's voice coming from Roselia's earrings and became curious to know how the dumb humans had created such a device. Just then, Roselia woke up, and the first thing she did was hug Leonis, saying how happy she was that he was unharmed. Eventually, it dawned on her that she was healed, and Leonis explained that he'd healed her with his magic. Roselia wasn't familiar with magic and assumed he meant that he'd used his holy sword, which had healing powers. Deciding to play along, Leonis asked what a holy sword was, and she explained that it was a type of power that developed in humans when the voids began appearing. She said those powers took on the form of weapons, so people began calling them holy swords. She told him that she had yet to manifest her holy sword, but Regina had one, and it was the same one he saw her using against the void earlier. Just as she concluded her explanations, Regina found them and after taking in the surroundings asked if they had encountered another void. That was when Roselia realized that she didn't know what happened to the void that attacked them, so she asked Lenoise. He told her that he'd been too scared to do anything, but when he looked up, the void had disappeared. Surprisingly, the girls believed his lie, as it was common for voids to act strangely. After they exited the ruins, Regina asked about Leonis again, and Roselia told her that he'd been abducted by the voids and brought there. She said he couldn't remember anything else aside from his name, so she was going to be his guardian in the meantime. They then got on their bike, and as Roselia rode towards the city, Regina introduced herself to Leonis as Roselia's maid. When they got closer to the city, Roselia explained to the astonished Leonis that it was called the Seventh Assault Garden and was humanity's last stronghold, which had been built to resist the voids. When they arrived, Leonis looked around in awe and said he'd never thought butterbrain humans could build islands. Regina then explained that the Assault Garden wasn't an island, but a megafloat which traveled across the sea to seek and destroy void colonies. While Leonis tried to digest this information, Roselia called someone and informed them that she'd sent over the data from their investigation to them. She also informed them about Leonis and said she'd bring him back to the dorms because he had a holy sword. Regina was impressed that a shrimpy-looking runt like him already had a holy sword, so Roselia bragged about how he'd used it to heal her wounds. She then told a confused Leonis not to worry about anything as he'd be living with them in the dorm for the Excalibur Academy students, explaining that the academy was an educational institute where people who would use holy swords trained to become holy knights. She assured him that she'd handle all his enrollment paperwork and asked him to trust her, so he thanked her for helping him. Once Regina left them, Roselia instructed Leonis to pass through a specific door so he could get examined, as it was the protocol for all those joining the shop for the first time. She promised she'd wait for him on the other side, and then drove away on her bike. Once she was out of sight, Leonis snuck in and summoned Sherry and Blackus from his shadow. The two welcomed him back, and then asked why he was in the body of a human child. Well, Blackus asked, while Sherry seemed to love his new look, and admitted he was cuter than he was when all he had going for him were his long bones. Leonis warned her not to get carried away by his looks, because even though he looked all cute and cuddly, he was still a ruthless son of a gun. He then told them that he needed them to scope out the city while he laid low and gathered information at the academy. He also warned them not to use their powers as magic was now obsolete, since humans developed American breathing. After parting ways with them, he passed through the door Roselia pointed out and almost had a cover blown since he was overpowered. He had to suppress his mana to fool the censors, and when he got to the other side he saw that an ID card had been printed for him. Roselia took the card from him and took a picture of it so she could schedule his holy sword inquiry. She explained that the inquiry was done to register the properties of a person's holy sword. Leonis saw this as a hassle, but decided to improvise and fool the Inquisitor so that questions about his power wouldn't arise. They then got on Roselia's bike and drove into the city so she could give him a brief tour of his new home. As they got closer to the dorms, a stupid idiot named Musil and his harem approached them, and when he saw the tear on Roselia's uniform, he began teasing her about it. Roselia tried to ignore him, but the guy was more persistent than a desperate simp and stood in her way to stop her from passing. He asked who Leonis was, but Roselia told him to mind his business, causing him to laugh and say she'd been reduced to a baby sister since she didn't have a holy sword. Roselia defended Leonis, saying he was more of a holy swordsman than Musil could dream of becoming, but Musil didn't believe her. He told her it was time she stopped playing hard to get and join his platoon, but Roselia said she'd rather be eaten by a titan. This annoyed Musil, and when he began complaining about her rudeness, Leonis deduced that Musil only wanted Roselia in his platoon because he was dying to taste her sweet nectar. When Roselia tried to walk past Musil, he grabbed her hair to stop her, causing Leonis to tell him that real men didn't mistreat women. When he turned to look at the demon lord, he was faced with an intense aura which had him kneeling before Leonis, who threatened to cut his sausage if he ever touched Roselia again. Terrified, Musil activated his holy sword, which Leonis thought looked like something he borrowed from Voldemort. However, before he could use it, Elphine approached them and reminded him that it was against the rules to use his holy sword in a personal fight. She also threatened to send footage of the incident to the administrative board if he didn't leave, so he did, but not before threatening to make Roselia pay for turning him down. Once the uncultured swine in his harem left, Roselia thanked Elphine for coming to her rescue. Elphine assured her that she was only looking out for her, and then introduced herself to Leonis as the data analyst of Roselia's platoon. Using her holy sword, which doubled as her analysis device, she took Leonis's measurement and told Roselia she would have a uniform ready for him soon. When the girls began talking about the just concluded mission, Roselia suddenly felt lightheaded but assured them that she was fine even though she had to lean against a tree to steady herself. Eventually, they made it to the dorm, and when they got to Roselia's room, she asked Leonis to take a bath before pointing him in the direction of the bathroom. Leonis went to the bathroom, and while he was washing his hair, Roselia came in and began helping him. He was shocked by her boldness, but she told him there was nothing wrong with what she was doing, making him wonder how backwards the world's morals had become. As she began washing him, she told him that after the inquiry, he would be allowed to join any platoon of his choice and asked if he would like to join her platoon. Leonis asked why she was determined to be on the front lines when she didn't have a holy sword. Resilia told him it was because she didn't want to be some cliché damsel in distress and wanted to fight to protect the people she cared about. While she spoke, the world began to blur, and before she knew what was happening, she was lying on the floor, unable to move her body. Leonis touched one of her thighs, and the mark which appeared on it in the ruins appeared again. The next moment, she grew some fangs and began drinking his blood, but when she realized what she was doing, she pulled back. Confused, she questioned her actions, so Leonis told her that it was the result of him healing her. He explained that he didn't have the power to bring back a life that had been lost, and revealed that she was actually dead. The following morning, Resilia awoke in her bed a bit confused as to how she got there, since the last thing she remembered was lying on the bathroom floor. Leonis explained that he'd used magic to carry her to bed, so she didn't have to worry about him getting glimpses of her goods. This prompted her to ask who he was, so he lied that he was the reincarnation of an ancient sorcerer, and explained that during his time, magic was a skill people had. He seemed very proud of himself when he revealed that he'd used magic to resurrect her as one of his minions, and she was now the most prestigious type of undead, which he called the Vampire Queen. Speaking further, he explained that the reason she sought his blood the day before was because she was weak, and her mana had depleted. Resilia couldn't believe that she was now a vampire, but Leonis apologized for turning her into one and explained that it was the only way he could think of bringing her back. Surprisingly, she wasn't mad and instead asked if he'd like to know more about her past, to which he said yes. She then told him about how she'd lost her family to avoid attack that happened on the third assault garden, and about how the academy took her and Regina in after that. She said because she came from a long line of holy knights, she believed that fighting voids would hasten the awakening of her holy sword, but that hadn't been the case, and now that she was dead, she was afraid that she would never get a holy sword. Leonis told her that he couldn't guarantee that she would get a holy sword, however he could guarantee that she would be stronger and faster than before. Now dressed in his new uniform, Leonis accompanied Resilia to the cafeteria and tried to pay for their food with one of the gold coins he'd stashed away, only for Resilia to tell him his money was worthless, as they only accepted credit as payment, and said the only form of physical money they accepted was alchemically forged silver. Leonis was shocked by this, because he'd gone from being the equivalent of Elon Musk to a rando who can't afford YouTube Premium. He was still reeling from the shock of his new status when a girl dressed in traditional clothing walked into the cafe with two shady-looking men. The girl told the men that she had no money to pay them what she owed, but promised to have some by the end of the week. The men told her they would need some sort of collateral to hold on to, and one of them suggested she give them her clothes. In response, the girl pulled out her wooden sword and knocked the two idiots to their knees before telling them that if they touched her again, they would learn why her mentor was Zorro. After the men ran off like the cowards they were, Resilia approached the girl and asked who the men were. The girl, whose name was Sakuya, explained that they were the bouncers from the casino. She visited the night before and said they had come to collect the money she owed the casino. She then turned her attention to Leonis, so Resilia introduced them to each other, after which she bought them lunch. While they ate, Leonis asked Sakuya why her uniform was different from every other person's own, and she told him it was because it was the traditional attire of her homeland Oron. She said she wore it as a tribute to her sister, because her village had been wiped out by voids and now her life was dedicated to slaying the voids. Later, Resilia took Leonis to his inquiry, and Alto, the woman in charge, told him that her job was to determine the type of holy sword he possessed. When he showed her his staff, she concluded that it was an all-purpose type, and was in the middle of preparing a void simulation to fit that specification when Leonis leveled the void simulators before him. Shocked by his overpowered ability, she decided to prepare an alternative simulation test, but Musil showed up with his harem of mind-controlled baddies and asked her to let him fight Leonis instead. Leonis readily agreed to face him, as he felt it would be more fun to humiliate the useless piece of garbage than fight some Walmart budget Robocops. When Musil activated his holy sword, his girls did the same thing, causing Resilia to protest the unfairness of the situation. Musil bragged that the girls were part of his weapon, as his holy sword had an ability named Dominion, which allowed him to control others. Leonis didn't have any problem taking on Musil and the girls, but Resilia was against it and insisted on helping him. Musil then said that if she and Leonis lost the match, she would join his platoon, and Leonis agreed on the condition that Musil never come close to Resilia again if he lost. Resilia tried to protest against the terms of the match, but Leonis assured her that unless pigs began to fly, there was no way he'd lose to an incompetent poser like Musil. This seemed to lift Resilia's spirits, so she borrowed one of the training swords and waited for Alto to signal the beginning of the match. Alto informed both parties that the match would end when one side surrendered or was knocked unconscious. When she announced the beginning of the match, Resilia charged at Musil's girls and effortlessly took them on. Musil was surprised by this, but Leonis was impressed to see that aside from her vampire abilities, Roselia was a certified swordswoman. When Roselia became preoccupied with two of the girls, Musil ordered another one to take Leonis down, but the demon lord blocked her attacks using shadows, and then used the same shadows to throw her off her feet. Roselia then took down the last girl and went after Musil, but before she could strike him down, he used his holy sword to make her stand in one place. He then went after Leonis, hoping to take him down first, but Roselia wasn't about to let him. She kept saying how she wanted to protect Leonis over and over again until a sword manifested in her hands. Everyone was surprised that her holy sword awakened in such a moment, and Roselia further surprised them by breaking free of Musil's control and charging at him. The coward was so stunned that it took him a few moments to realize what was happening until she had cut his holy sword and pointed her sword at him. Having no choice, he accepted his defeat and Regina rushed towards Roselia to congratulate her for awakening her holy sword. Later in their dorm, Roselia asked Leonis if he could help her train to become stronger, and Leonis agreed. After dinner, Leonis went to Elfina's room so she could collect his biodata and upload it to the Academy's network. While he was there, he asked about her holy sword, and she told him it was called the Eye of the Witch. She said she used it to collect, analyze, and transmit data since she could no longer use it to attack or fight voids. Leonis asked why that was, and she explained that in her previous platoon, she was the attacker in charge of supplying firepower. However, after she watched two of her teammates die, her holy sword lost its attack capabilities. Since then, she hadn't been useful during battles, so when Roselia invited her to join her platoon, she happily accepted. When she finished uploading Leonis's data, he noticed she had a map open on her computer, so he asked if he could take a look at it. Elfini provided him with a tablet and explained how it worked to him, so when he returned to Roselia's room, he went over it. From what he could see, there were correlations between the places where he fought the heroes in the past and the places where the void outbreaks occurred. Hoping to find out more, he summoned Blackus and asked him to brief him on what he'd learned during his investigation. Blackus told him that the entire ship was powered by an enormous mana crystal, which the humans referred to as a power plant. Leonis was intrigued and said if he could get his hands on the mana crystal, it would be beneficial to his course. After Blackus left, Sherry showed up with some snacks and tried to get Leonis to try them, but he refused and asked her to brief him on the details of her mission. Sherry informed him that no one in the city knew about him or the war that occurred 1,000 years ago, which didn't surprise him much. Sherry then expressed her displeasure with Leonis for making Roselia his minion, but Leonis told her that Roselia would become his greatest asset one day. When he said he had plans to make her his right-hand man, Sherry called him a dumb fool and left just as Roselia came into the room in only her towel.
Oh my.
To tell Leonis to go take a bath. Meanwhile, underneath the ship, a team went to investigate some void activity and found a plant-like creature attached to one of the anchor chains. When they tried to get closer to it, they were attacked and all communication with them was lost. The following day, Leonis woke up and felt a slight pain in his neck and realized that Roselia had helped herself to his blood while he slept. Immediately, he went to her bedroom and using the power of Mark on her body, ordered her to wake up. Roselia was surprised that she'd been woken up in such a manner, so he explained that her Mark allowed him to compel her to do his will. This made her ask if he could also compel her to do one of those intense workouts cultured people engaged in. Leonis replied, saying she should get a bucket and a mop and start cleaning the inside of her head, because it was just as filthy as Hisoka's. He told her that she ought to start behaving like a lady and pointed to the bite marks on his neck. Roselia apologized for taking advantage of him while he slept and explained that she'd been very thirsty, which was why she'd done it. He accepted her apologies but told her that the next time she needed her blood fixed, she should tell him instead of helping herself to his blood like it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. Their conversation was interrupted by Roselia's phone ringing, and when she picked up, Elfini informed her that a strategy meeting had been called. Surprised, Roselia asked if she knew why, and she said it most likely had to do with the research team that went to investigate the void activity in the water the previous night. She said the team was yet to upload their findings into the database, so it was safe to assume something unexpected had happened. After hanging up, Roselia told Leonis that since it was their day off, she wanted him to train her, and he agreed. Meanwhile, the strategy meeting was already taking place with the acting commander of the ship, the military advisor, and the chairman of the board all present. They were informed that the research team that went to investigate the void activities under the ship had been wiped off the face of the earth. At the divisional commander's request, the scientists pulled up the image the team sent before they were annihilated. From what they could see, this void resembled plant roots, and it made Alto question if the void that attacked the team was a void lord or a mutated void. The chairman of the board asked her not to jump to conclusions like women like to do, and told her that the appearance of a void lord could mean that what happened in the third assault garden could happen again. This statement prompted the acting commander to order a follow-up investigation on the root void, so they made preparations to send a reconnaissance squad to the scene. Later, while Leonis and Roselia trained, he summoned a small portion of his skeletal army and had her fight them. When Roselia finished fighting them, she was panting like she'd run a marathon. However, she felt fulfilled and thanked Leonis for giving her such a challenge. After he recalled his skeletons back into the shadows, Roselia suggested they go eat so she could thank him properly. In another part of the city, Sherry got a job at a restaurant, but nearly gave her boss a heart attack when she cut up the bowl along with the potatoes he asked her to peel. Because of this, the man sent her to sweep the front of the shop, but just as she was about to step out, she spotted Leonis and Roselia. Not wanting to be seen by her master, she hid, but couldn't help but feel annoyed that he was having the time of his life with that rip-off Elsa, who was planning to do anything but let him go. When they drove off, she became curious to know where they were heading and decided it was time to put on her Sherlock hat. A little while later, Roselia pulled up in front of the restaurant she told Leonis about. Some kids came out of the restaurant to greet them, and Roselia explained that the kids were orphans who lived there with the owner. Leonis felt a sense of kinship with the children, as he was also an orphan. However, he could sense that the children were better off than he was all those years ago. When they went inside, one of the kids lifted Roselia's skirt.
Yeah, boy.
And that made Leonis move to teach the brat a lesson. Before he could do so, Roselia laughed and said it was a silly prank, so he let go of the issue. The owner of the restaurant soon came down, and after Roselia introduced Leonis to her, the children flocked to him like sheep, asking him to show them his holy sword. Thankfully, Roselia intervened by telling them she had donuts, and that made them forget about him immediately. Meanwhile, the recon team sent to the site of the void activity discovered that the root-like void was no longer where the first team had spotted it. This left them perplexed, but Elfina's sensors picked up some vibrations occurring beneath the city. Sakuya seemed to sense something was off because she woke up just as Regina walked in and noticed the troubled looks they wore. At the same time, in one of the storage rooms beneath the city, some workers found the missing root, but it had grown and spread around. The higher-ups were soon informed about the missing root void, leaving the acting commander feeling worried. When Alto told him that Elfini was waiting to brief them on what she discovered, the man asked them to patch her through. Once Elfini's video was on the monitor, she told the council that her holy sword detected micro-vibrations in some areas beneath the city. She explained that after amplifying the vibrations and removing the background sound, she discovered that they weren't the same as those of a magical device. She also said there were some disruptions in the magnetic fields, and after detecting similar vibrations in other underground locations, she concluded that there was void activity on the ship. The council found it hard to believe what she'd told them and argued that a void couldn't slip past the ship's defenses. The scientists backed up what Elfini said and added that they had gotten the same readings as she had. This prompted the council to ask how the void had gotten in, and they were told that it must have slipped in through the anchored chain openings. The board chairman asked why they were unable to track the void's movements, and Elfini said the creature might have been masking its movements to sneak into the city. Of course, he found this absurd, as they had never heard of an instance where a void possessed any intelligence. Just then, another alarm went off, and they received a report that the root-like void was growing in one of the underground storage rooms. Immediately, a team was sent to dispose of it. However, when they arrived, the vines came alive and chaos broke out. At some point, the live feed was cut off, and the council tried to get in contact with the commander, but discovered that all communications were down. When the feed came back on, the council was informed that the poison ivy spawn had escaped. The divisional commander tried to make sense of how the void was getting around and evading them, so they backtracked its movement from when it got on the ship. Elfini was the first to deduce that the void was heading to the power plant, and said that once it got there it would trigger a stampede, and what happened at the third assault garden would repeat itself. Immediately, the acting commander ordered that soldiers be sent to protect the power plant. Unfortunately, by the time they arrived, the void had already attached itself to the mana crystals, making it impossible for the soldiers to do anything. Having no choice, the acting commander declared that the ship would be shifted into fortress mode, and ordered that all the civilians be evacuated to the shelters while all military personnel prepared for the stampede. Immediately, everyone moved into action, and just as the void took full control of the power plant, the evacuation alarms went off across the city. Roselia and Leonis rushed outside the restaurant to see what was happening, and Roselia nearly fainted from shock when she saw portals opening up and allowing voids to invade the city. She kept watching as the city turned into a large weapon and began shooting down the voids. At the same time, her platoon members had gathered at their designated districts to help the civilians evacuate into the shelters. Regina asked Elfini if she'd contacted Roselia, and she told her that communication was down everywhere. However, she assured her that Roselia was fine and would join them soon. The girls soon joined the fight and began taking down voids left and right. At the restaurant, Leonis watched with admiration as the tower rained gunfire on the voids, but noticed that Roselia was distressed because she couldn't get in contact with her platoon. She then rushed back into the restaurant to gather everyone and take them to the shelter, and while she was gone, Sherry suddenly showed up in front of Leonis. He found it a bit strange that she'd shown up at that moment, but because the situation was dire, he instructed her to find his platoon members and assist them. After she left, Leonis tried to join Roselia and the others, but noticed that the voids had made it to that part of the city. So before they could step outside, he called Roselia's attention to them. Roselia then instructed everyone to remain inside while she and Leonis took care of the voids. Outside, she activated her holy sword and Leonis summoned his magic staff, so when the voids tried to attack, Roselia chopped off the heads of 2 and Leonis burned the remaining to a crisp. Soon after, more portals opened up and more voids dropped down into the city. Sakuya and Regina easily took down the Ogre-class and Wyvern-class voids, but things took a turn for worse when a Hydra-class void dropped down into the middle of the city. It even came with some Dragon-class voids as backup, and these dragons began destroying the cannons on the tower. Leonis quickly deduced that he'd need a high-level spell to slay the dragon, so when a group of Ogre-class voids tried to attack them, he asked Roselia to handle them. When the spell was completed, fireballs began raining down on the voids, but unfortunately, the rain of fire hadn't been enough to slay the dragon, and it tried to breathe fire on Roselia. Thankfully, her reflexes were good, and she moved out of the way before she could get burned. Just then, Blackus came out of the shadows and bit the dragon, so it began trying to shake him off. This allowed Leonis to chant another spell, which thankfully took the dragon out once and for all. Roselia was surprised that he'd taken out the dragon alone, but before she could get up, the ground opened up and the vines of the Void Lord captured her. After it dragged her away, Leonis tried to go after her, but more vines came up and took the form of a face. This face was familiar to Leonis, as it was none other than Arakel the Great Sage. Leonis tried to attack Arakel with a fire spell, but the overgrown Groot yeeted out of the way and crawled back into the ground where he came from. Leonis used the seal on his hand to confirm that Roselia was still alive, and deduced that Arakel had taken her to lure him down. Just as he was about to jump in after them, Blackus emerged from the shadows and drew his attention to the children and the proprietress standing outside the restaurant, watching him. Leonis approached them and asked them to return inside, as it wasn't safe for them to be outside. They ignored what he said, but the older girl told him that they had come outside to thank him for protecting them, and begged that he rescue Roselia before it was too late. He'd assured the girl that he'd get Roselia back, but before he rejoined Blackus, he put up a magical barrier around the restaurant and summoned 2 skeletons to guard the place. After he returned to Blackus, Leonis heard Elfina's voice coming from Roselia's earrings, which had fallen off when that disfigured swamp monster nabbed her. He picked it up and informed Elfina of the situation, after which he pleaded with her to use her holy sword to track Roselia's location. Elfina refused, saying the mission was too dangerous for an underdeveloped rugrat like him. She instructed him to head to where she and the others were fighting Ghidorah's younger brother, and assured him that the platoon of that district would rescue her. Leonis argued that it would be too late, and begged her to trace Roselia's biosignature, so she agreed. A few seconds later, she told Leonis that Roselia was in the power plant, so he thanked her and cut off communication. Just then, Regina called out to Elfini to move out of the way, but her reaction time was too slow, and just as she was about to become Kaiju Breakfast, Sherry protected her by using her whip to behead the void before it could get her. Meanwhile, Leonis and Blackus arrived at the power plant and found Arakel's roots sitting pretty around the mana crystal, which he was actively sapping energy from. Leonis tried to detach him from the crystal by setting him ablaze, but the old geezer regenerated in a matter of seconds. He then demanded to know how Leonis was still alive, and Leonis told him it was because he'd sealed his soul away. Arakel called him a fool and said his resurrection would end in vain because the world was about to be rebuilt along with the empty star. The next moment, miniature heads popped up all around his vines, and when they began harmonizing it to him, Leonis wondered if he'd somehow ended up in the set of a Disney movie. However, he soon realized that those harmonizing heads were the priests from the Sacred Order, which Arakel had assimilated. It wasn't long after this realization that Arakel began attacking Leonis and Blackus. They evaded his roots and fought back, but soon realized that they were at a disadvantage because they were in Arakel's expanded domain. Worst of all, he could cast multiple spells because of the extra heads he had on him. At the same time, Roselia tried to escape the roots that she'd been bound with, but the more she struggled against them, the more she bled. Still, she wasn't deterred, as all she wanted to do was break free and go help Leonis, so she activated her holy sword. Fortunately, her vampire powers activated, and using her blood, she created mini blades, which she used to cut up her restraints. This allowed Leonis to pinpoint her location, and the next moment, he shot her earring, which he'd infused with his blood, into her chest. Immediately, Rosilia's power levels increased, and she broke out of her restraints while sprouting a pair of blood wings. When Rosilia saw Leonis, she rushed over to him, which enraged Arakel, so he swore that he'd make Leonis pay. He then began chanting a spell Blackus recognized, and deduced that by the time he was finished, losses would be colossal, as the entire ship would resemble Liberio's port city. Leonis also came to this conclusion, so he asked Rosilia to buy him time while he prepared to take Arakel down. Without hesitation, Rosilia spilt some of her blood and used it to form more blood blades, which she began using to fight off Arakel's roots. Blackus asked Leonis what his plan was, and the demon lord told him it was time to bring out the big guns, or in his case, his demon sword. Blackus reminded him of what Rosilia had said about the sword, and Leonis told him that he knew what he was doing. As he pulled out the sword, he declared that the 7th Assault Garden now belonged to him, as the condition for using the sword was that he was willing to protect what was his. After the sword acknowledged Leonis's decision, he used it to deliver a powerful slash, which he'd named Ragna Lost. With this, Arakel was defeated and the stampede began to die down, so Rosilia and Leonis returned to the surface and were reunited with their friends. Days later, while reconstruction was on the way, Leonis visited the library to do some research on the city he claimed as his. However, when he tried to access the vault, he was denied entry, and the artificial spirit in charge informed him that he needed the authorization of the Administrative Bureau to access the vault. Leonis tried to talk no jutsu his way into the vault, but the spirit insisted that he put in a request. Just then, Regina snuck up on him and covered his eyes, but he easily guessed who she was. Regina then teased him, saying he should have played the fool and enjoyed the feeling of her melons against his back a little longer. Leonis scolded her for making such a suggestion and asked if she'd followed him to the library since he hadn't told anyone where he was going. She told him it was pure coincidence they met and explained that she'd come to return some video software she borrowed when she saw him standing there. She asked what he'd come there to do, and he told her he came to research the ancient language written all over the ruins they'd found him. Regina believed his lie and offered to help him before sidestepping him and approaching the spirit. She asked it to let Leonis into the vault, and when it tried to tell her that she didn't have authorization, she somehow hypothesized it into doing her bidding. Leonis asked how she'd managed to do that, and she told him that a true magician never revealed their secrets. After they entered the vault, they both received messages inviting them to the commendation ceremony on the princess's ship because of the role they played during the stampede. Just then, Rosilia called Leonis to ask where he was, and he told her he'd gone out to eat but promised to meet her and the others at the harbor later. After hanging up the phone, he asked Regina to head out without him, but she told him she wasn't going to go attend the ceremony and then left. Meanwhile, in the demi-human conservation area, some demi-humans plotted to abduct the princess and force the Empire to release their imprisoned kin. A goblin named Elsa asked their leader Becerra if it was wise to carry out such a dangerous mission when they knew that humans possessed holy swords. Before he could respond, a dark elf who introduced herself as Sharnak, the evil witch of Everdark Forest, approached them. She told them she could help them and proposed that they hijack the princess's ship along with her and force her to take them to the capital. The group seemed to buy the idea and asked how they achieved such a feat, and she said she'd bestow upon them powers that were far superior to any holy sword. She then held up her demon's sword in front of Becerra and bestowed upon him another demon's sword she claimed was a gift from the goddess. Becerra tried out his new blade, and the group was astonished by how easily it cut a tree in half. Sharnak promised to bestow similar weapons on all of them, but asked that in exchange for them, they deliver all the holy swordsmen to her to sacrifice to the goddess, and they agreed. Later, Leonis arrived at the harbor, but before heading to the ship, he visited some of the stalls and bought a gift for Rosilia, because he felt she'd been a faithful minion and deserved that. He arrived at the ship when the princess came out on the deck to wave at her subjects, and he told himself that it was a nice tactic to keep the people loyal. Rosilia and the others soon arrived, and after Leonis approached them, he gave Rosilia the gift he bought for her. Rosilia thanked him, and after putting the gift away, said it was time they boarded the ship, but before they could do so, a tryhard Azula named Fenris approached them. She bragged about representing the president of the student council at the ceremony, and asked Rosilia if she and her band of misfits were there for sightseeing. Rosilia told her that they had also been invited for the ceremony, and when it looked like they were about to start exchanging words, Elfini stepped in. Fenris listened to Elfin, but before she walked away, she condescendingly congratulated Rosilia on awakening her holy sword. Leonis asked who the annoying blonde was, and Rosilia told him that she was the Draco Malfoy to her Harry Potter. Meanwhile, the demi-humans breached the ship and stole the faces of the guards they murdered so they could blend in. Sometime later, after everyone had boarded the ship, the princess and her guards were ambushed on their way to the banquet hall. The demi-humans murdered her guards and told her that if she did as they asked, they would let her keep living. The princess quickly set her spirit animal loose and encouraged it to run away before Sharnak revealed herself. At the same time, the remaining demi-humans took control of the room where the guests were. Fenris tried to play the hero, but Elsa shot at the guests and threatened that the next shot she took would send someone to the afterlife if she didn't put her holy sword away. Having no choice, she did Elsa's bidding, but to ensure that no one else would do the same thing, the oldest elf threw down an apple bomb. He warned that if they did anything, he'd detonate the bomb. So everyone fell in line and surrendered their phones and communication devices. The civilians were then kept separate from Rosalia and the others. And when the demi-humans were asked what they wanted, Gerda revealed that they wanted the Empire to release their kin. Fenris told him that the Crown didn't negotiate with terrorists, which pissed him off, but Elsa reminded him that they weren't supposed to hurt them. He backed off and began complaining about how he didn't understand why a goddess needed so many sacrifices. At the mention of the word goddess, Leonis became curious and decided to go investigate. However, he told Rosalia he was going to check on the princess. After he slipped away using his shadows, the girls huddled together so the demi-humans wouldn't notice he was missing. Meanwhile, Sharnak used artificial spirits to force the princess to activate the ship's engine and set a course for a void reef. Beysetta was surprised by this and insisted the princess change courses, but Sharnak said she couldn't care less about their plans to free their kin. She then revealed that she used them for her own plans, and when Beysetta tried to attack her, she manipulated his demon sword and burnt him alive. Scared for his life, Giraffe kept quiet and agreed to do everything Sharnak wanted. Outside, a guard noticed the ship was moving, and as he tried to figure out why, the princess's spirit found its way to Regina. When Regina touched the spirit, she heard the princess's voice telling it to get help. Realizing something was wrong, she grabbed the spirit and jumped onto the ship before it sailed away from the port. As fate would have it, she ran into Leonis in the hallway, and when he asked what she was doing there, she revealed that her little sister was in danger. She then revealed that she was the fourth princess of the Empire, but her birth had been seen as a bad omen. This was because she'd been born on the night when a red star the people nicknamed the Scarlet Calamity was shining in the sky. She said the king had ordered her death, but Rosalia's grandfather had convinced the king to let her live. He then handed her over to Rosalia's father, who took her to his home and raised her alongside Rosalia as her maid to keep her identity a secret. She said only her platoon members knew her secret, and the only reason she'd come to the harbor was to catch a glimpse of her sister. However, she found her spirit, and since all members of the royal family possessed the ability to connect with spirits like all the Avatars, it had let her know that her sister was in trouble, so she boarded the ship. Leonis told her that the princess had been captured by some demi-humans, and added that the banquet hall was also under their control. He said he'd slipped away to look for the princess and asked her to join him. Regina quickly accepted the offer and put the spirit down so it could lead them to the princess. In the banquet hall, Eflini told Rosalia that she'd analyzed the features of the bomb using one of her drones, which was hidden behind the chandelier. She said the elf's wand was the bomb's trigger and asked Rosalia to buy her time to delay the bomb's activation. Rosalia found a fruit fork lying on the floor behind her and used the fork to pierce one of her fingers so she could use her powers. At the same time, Leonis and Regina arrived on the bridge but discovered that Sharnak and the princess were gone. Regina saw that they had shut down the control panel so she couldn't steer the ship away from the course it had been set to. Leonis suggested she reach out to the princess using the spirit, but Regina refused, saying if she did her identity would be revealed. The demon lord reminded her that the reason she boarded the ship was to save her sister, so it didn't matter what she had to do to achieve it. Regina digested his words and decided to reach out to the princess, and after a few short seconds, she did. The princess asked who she was and she told her she was a passing spirit medium who happens to find the spirit. She then asked where the princess was and the princess told her they were heading to the flight deck. Regina told her she would come to her, but the princess told her not to and begged her to prioritize changing the course of the ship. She said the ship was headed to a void reef, and the only way to change course was to connect to the spirit monitoring system at the heart of the lower deck and put in the access code. She gave Regina the access code and begged her to hurry before it was too late. When the connection broke, Regina told Leonis where to find the princess, so he promised to bring her back in one piece and then jumped out of the window to the deck below. In the banquet hall, Rosalia used her blood like a string and connected it to the elf's wand without anyone noticing. Before she could give Eflin the signal to jam the bomb signal, Fenris began taunting the demi-humans. Gur tried to get her to stop yapping, but while he was in the middle of threatening her, they heard a plate break. The culprit was Sakuya, who untied herself because she got hungry and needed her hands to eat. Durder approached her angrily, but Elsa warned him to be careful as she could tell from Sakuya's clothes that she was one of those ore and adrenaline junkies. Fenris stood up just then, and since she liked to make everything about her, she called dibs on fighting Gerda. The stupid wolf fell for her taunts and charged at her, but she easily knocked him to the floor, proving that she'd earned her black belt fair and square. Rosalia and Elfin used this commotion to carry out their plan and disarmed the old elf before he could activate the bomb. Elsa tried to keep everyone down by threatening them with her gun, but Sakuya knocked her out with the hilt of her sword. Fenris then activated her holy sword, which took the form of ice wolves, and ordered them to attack Gerda. The elf was the only one remaining, and Rosalia easily knocked him out before scolding Fenris for almost ruining their plan with her loud mouth. After they freed all the hostages, Rosalia tried to call Leonis, but couldn't get through to him. Just then, the kids drew their attention to the windows, and that was when they realized that the ship had sailed into a void reef. The voids wasted no time in breaching the ship, so Fenris and Sakuya began fighting them off, while Elfini and Rosalia guided the people out of the room. Leonis contacted Rosalia through the keychain he'd given her and told her to go help Regina. She left immediately, and when she found her, the both of them took down a void before rushing to the lower deck. In the banquet hall, the girls did their best to keep the voids at bay, but the situation worsened when Big Axe's distant cousin, which they had nicknamed the Brain Eater, showed up. Sakuya asked the others to head to the other room and protect the people while she stayed back to fight the Brain Eater. Once Fenris locked the door behind them, Sakuya unlocked a secret technique, which turned her sword into a demon sword. Meanwhile, Regina and Rosalia made it to the lower deck, and after a brief fight with the voids, Regina went ahead and connected to the monitoring system while Rosalia stood guard. Outside, Giraffe was devoured by voids, and just as the princess began to lose hope, she noticed the ship was changing course. Sharnak tried to fly off the ship, but Leonis held the airship in place using his shadows. Back inside the banquet hall, the girls were backed into a corner, but Sherry showed up and slayed the remaining voids, while Sakuya defeated the Brain Eater. Outside, Sharnak demanded to know who Leonis was, and he told her he was a demon lord. She called him a stupid child and said playing pretend didn't qualify him as a demon lord. But Leonis proved he was the real deal by countering the spell she tried to use on him. The witch was surprised, but he didn't give her time to digest this information before he bound her with his shadows and asked her to reveal the name of the goddess she was working for. Sharnak tried to speak up, but before she could get the words out, she began glitching like an old Pac-Man game, and the next thing he knew, a sword was coming out of her. Leonis recognized the sword as the Demon Lord Slayer, the evil trashing blade, Zolgstar Mazekis, and wondered how it had gotten there. Before his very eyes, the sword transformed into a rip-off Decepticon and opened portals to bring voids to the deck. He tried to destroy the sword, but it still possessed the powers it had when it was a holy sword, so it countered Leonis' spell. Before he could think of another way to destroy it, it teleported and reappeared behind Leonis, just as the Demon Lord noticed the princess was in danger. Leonis took out the voids, but the sword thought it would be nice to mess with him and began playing hide and seek. Regina saw what was happening from the camera on the deck, so she controlled the guns to open fire on the voids and the sword. When she noticed the guns were ineffective against the sword, she launched missiles at it. Rosalia came out from the second missile Regina launched, and after Leonis caught her, he asked her to fend off the voids while he took care of the sword. While she did that, he pulled out his demon sword and used Ragna Lost to finish the corrupted holy sword off. Later, the princess thanked the girls for saving her and the hostages from the demi-humans and the voids. Leonis and Regina weren't present, so when the princess asked about them, Rosalia told her Leonis was feeling a bit sick, so he was sent home, and said that Regina had already left. However, she delivered the message Regina asked her to deliver to the princess, which was that she wished her a bright and joyous future. A few days later, the guards tracked down the remaining members of the demi-human group that tried to abduct the princess. Before they could take them in, Leonis showed up and turned the guards to stone. He then revealed himself to the demi-humans, but didn't let them see his face because he wore a mask. He forced the demi-humans to their knees when they tried to revolt against him, and said the only reason they were still breathing was because he was feeling generous. He then told them that his name was Zolvals, and said he was a demon lord, as well as the rightful ruler of the world. He asked them to dedicate the rest of their NPC lives to serving him if they wanted to avoid getting captured by the humans. Having no choice, they'd pledged their loyalty to them, and he created an underground labyrinth for them to stay until he needed them. Unfortunately, before he could make a dramatic exit, Rosalia called his phone, and when he picked up, she demanded to know where he was. Quickly, he hung up on her, and then went back to acting like a low-budget overlord before disappearing into the shadows, leaving his new minions stunned. When he returned to the dorm, he got rid of his mask and his cloak before leaving his room to find Rosalia. It didn't take him long to find her, as she'd forgotten to lock her door while dressing up, so being a gentleman, Leonis turned away.
Come on, man.
Regina walked in at that moment, and when she saw the both of them, she asked if she was interrupting something. Both of them swore she was misinterpreting the situation, and after Rosalia got dressed, they sat down to eat the sandwiches Regina brought. Rosalia asked Leonis where he'd gone that morning, and he lied that he'd gone to train in preparation for the practice match they had later that day. The girls told him it was a wise decision and said they had to do their best if they wanted to beat Fenris's platoon and rank up. A few hours later, the practice match began, and Rosalia and Leonis worked together to take one of the flags belonging to Fenris' platoon. Elfini was saddled with the responsibility of guarding the main flag for her platoon and also providing surveillance for the rest of her team. She and Regina worked well together, but Sakuya got carried away and began chasing after Fenris' ice wolves. From the bleachers, Alto figured out what the 18th platoon's strategy was, and she told the council members with her that it was a good one. But if they failed to implement it properly, they could lose the match. Just then, an ice wolf charged at Rosalia, and as she tried to cut it down, another one snuck up behind her and bit her leg. Leonis destroyed the wolf, but the ice burn on Rosalia's leg remained and it hurt. Fenris revealed herself after this and laughed at Rosalia for falling into her trap, but Rosalia told her to stop acting high and mighty. She asked why she was guarding a sub-flag when she was the captain, and Fenris told her it was because she wanted a chance to fight her. Feeling confident, she revealed her platoon's strategy, and that was when Rosalia realized that they had been playing Fenris's game all along. Leonis admired Fenris' intelligence, but told himself that it didn't make up for the fact that she was competing for the most annoying character of the year. Fenris told Rosalia that defeating her would mean flawless victory for her, and then turned her wolves into boxing gloves. Her subordinate went after Leonis, but he knocked her out in under a minute before returning his attention to the Rosalia and Fenris. Fenris slammed Rosalia into a tree and held her there with ice, but Rosalia told her that she wouldn't allow her to defeat her. She also said some other things that sounded like something a motivational speaker would say, and when she finished, she broke out of her ice cuffs. Fenris fainted from shock after Rosalia knocked her down and left her sword a few inches away from her face. A few minutes later, the 11th platoon's main flag was captured and the 18th platoon was declared the winner of the match. That night, a mysterious man named Nifakes, who turned out to be Sharnik's partner in crime, fed holy swords to a man of crystal. He wondered out loud how she died, but said she'd done a great job securing the holy swords for him. The swords were an offering to the goddess they were trying to resurrect, and he said it was almost time for her to awaken. Outside, a portal opened up, and the 3rd Assault Garden, which he was using as his base, floated into the open ocean. A few hours later, Alto summoned the 18th platoon and informed them that their unmanned drones had sent footage of the 3rd Assault Garden, which suddenly appeared out of nowhere. She said the ship was sailing towards them and added that they had received 2 distress signals from the ship. Alto said those distress signals could mean there were survivors on the ship, but they couldn't be sure until they had checked it out, so she assigned the mission to them. The mission was simple: look for survivors and shut down the ship's engines. They had to round up the mission within 72 hours, because if that time was exceeded, it would be too late for the 7th Assault Garden to retreat, and the 3rd Assault Garden would crash into it. The platoon accepted the mission, but Rosalia asked why she'd assigned the mission to them. Alto admitted it was because Rosalia and Regina came from there, but also said she believed in their capabilities as a team. Rosalia thanked her for her honesty and tried to suggest they leave Leonis out of the mission, but he protested and insisted they take him along. The following day, the girls gathered at the flight deck so they could make the short trip to the 3rd Assault Garden. Before joining them, Leonis asked Blackus to watch over the city in his absence and instructed Sherry to accompany him. Soon they were airborne, and a few hours later, Elfina landed the aircraft in the 3rd Assault Garden. Once everyone had gotten off the aircraft, Rosalia instructed Regina, Sakuya, and Elfini to see if they could pinpoint the location where the distress signal came from. She said she and Leonis would head to the power plant to shut it down, but Elfini insisted she allow her to send one of her drones with them. As they separated into their groups, Leonis instructed Sherry to accompany the girls and watch over them in case of an emergency, a job the demon maid was unhappy with, but had no choice but to do as her master ordered. Shortly after, Leonis and Rosalia were attacked by a void, and Rosalia got trapped under a light pole. A few minutes before their aircraft landed on the ship, an elf named Arl appeared in another part of the destroyed city. It seemed she'd been sent there from the past to carry out a mission, so she found herself some clothes and went to survey the area. It was while she was doing this that the 18th platoon arrived, and she was confused as to what they had flown in on. Nifakes suddenly appeared behind her, and he told her that what she'd seen was a transportation device and not a dragon. Arl turned to face him in surprise, and Nifakes said it was an honor to be in the presence of the great elf hero. This statement made Arl take on a defensive pose, and she asked if he was also from the past. Nifakes introduced himself as Nifakes the Void Lord, and said he knew she was there to destroy the goddess's vessel. This made her even more suspicious of him, but when she moved to attack him, he vanished like your hairline. Before she could figure out where he'd gone off to, a void came up behind her. At the same time, Leonis used his shadows to teleport Roselia to an underground tunnel to prevent her from getting hurt. The Void attacked him with a spell and destroyed Elfina's drum in the process, but thanks to his barrier, Leonis was unharmed. He retaliated with another spell, but the Void blocked the attack with a barrier. Realizing that the Void was mimicking an angel and using its powers to counter his low-level spells, Leonis decided to get serious. The Void kept attacking Leonis and countering all his spells, but he managed to defeat it using a fireball spell and a lightning spell. He then rushed to the tunnel to check on Roselia, who discovered when she tried to stand up that her legs were injured. Leonis assured her that vampire abilities would heal her, but he said it would take a while. He suggested they'd find a place to lay low until she was healed, but as he was speaking, he noticed some figures approaching them. Immediately, he tried to attack them, but Roselia told him not to because her mana counter wasn't picking up any signals. When the figures drew closer, Roselia realized they were ghosts and recognized the crest on their clothes as the one belonging to her family. Their leader, William, explained that they had come because they knew she was hurt and wanted to help her. William also said if she was on the ship, it meant their distress signal had reached them. So she asked why ghosts needed to send out a distress signal. William explained that they had sent it out as a warning because the 7th Assault Garden was at risk of being overtaken by a stampede. According to him, a new Void Lord had taken up residence in the ruins and meddled with the mana crystal. Once it had absorbed all the energy, it would awaken, and chaos would be the order of the day. Roselia said if that was the case, they needed to find proof of the Void Lord's presence and send it to the 7th Garden so they could evacuate. William promised they would help her do that, but suggested she go with them to her family's estate and stay there until she was fully recovered. Leonis helped her to the surface, and Roselia was surprised to see that the ghosts had driven a limo to come pick her up. Leonis thought it was impressive but summoned his skeleton horses to draw the limo to their destination because he wanted them to go faster.
What?
Meanwhile, the others encountered Auril, who mistook them for Nefakes' accomplices and challenged them to a fight. Since Sakudia was the only one skilled with the sword, she accepted the challenge and fought Auril. However, a few minutes into the fight, she overpowered Auril with her weapon and acknowledged that the only reason she won was because Auril was injured. Inside the limo, Roselia asked Leonis for a blood refill, and he offered her his neck, but after a few seconds, he realized if he didn't stop her, she'd suck dry. Fortunately, Elfine reached out to them at that moment, so Roselia pulled away to speak to her and told her that they were heading to her family estate. She said she and Leonis would wait there until Elfine and the others linked up with them so they would head to the power plant together. Elfine told her they would head out once they finished treating Auril, who they believed was a survivor. After they cut their communication line, Leonis presented Roselia with a dress, which he said would increase her powers whenever she wore it. Roselia thanked him for the gift, and he used magic to compress it into her body, saying all she had to do was imagine herself wearing it if she wanted to use it. He then gave her 3 skeleton keychains and told her that they were good luck charms. In the destroyed mall, Regina finished treating Auril, and Sakuya asked what her name was after dropping off a new shirt for her. Auril told them her name and apologized for attacking them earlier, but they told her not to worry about it. Just then, Elfine mentioned that Auril's name wasn't listed in the 3rd Garden's database and asked how she'd gotten there. Auril ignored her question and asked what they were doing on the ship, so Elfine explained that they were on a mission to investigate the ruins. Auril found everything she said a bit strange, but considering that they were in the future, she didn't try to make sense of it. She revealed that she was on a mission to slay a goddess, but refused to tell them who assigned the mission to her or where she came from. When she tried to leave, her stomach growled, so Sakuya offered her some snacks and suggested she rest a bit. Meanwhile, Roselia and Leonis arrived at her family estate, and while Roselia walked around the ruined mansion reminiscing, Leonis sat downstairs cleaning a bone. When Roselia entered what was left of their father's study, she became sad and started crying. To make her feel better, the guards created an illusion of the past where her father had sat with her in the study and read the story of the Demon Lord to her. According to the story, the Demon Lord was cruel and lived in a castle made of bones. His cruelty angered God, so God bestowed power upon a hero and sent him to defeat the Demon Lord. After the Demon Lord's defeat, everyone praised the hero and went on to live happily ever after. When her father finished the story, he told her there was more to it than the book said, and Roselia pleaded with him to tell her more. The illusion soon faded and Roselia was back in the destroyed room, but this time, Nefakes was in the room with her. When Roselia asked if he was a savior, he became annoyed and attacked her with a high-level spell. Roselia fell and hit her head, and as she lay unconscious on the floor, she dreamt of her last conversation with her father, which happened on the night of the stampede. She had begged him to take her with him, but he refused and told her to go to the shelter with Regina and the others. However, before he left, he told her that in the story, the demon lord would appear when the world needed him the most, and he would defeat the voids. The next moment, she opened her eyes and was surprised to see 3 skeletons standing in front of her. Nifix was also surprised to see the skeletons and wondered if he'd been wrong to assume Roselia was a normal human. He tried to attack her again, but Leonis arrived just then and countered the spell. Nifix got hit by Leonis' spell and fell in a ball of fire, while Leonis checked on Roselia. She assured him that she was fine and asked who the skeletons were because she realized that they were the ones who protected her from Nifix's attack earlier. Leonis told her that were the keychains he'd given her in the limo, and the skeletons introduced themselves as the 3 warriors of Rognas. When they began arguing about who defended Roselia first, Nifix arose from his position on the floor, and that was when Leonis got a proper look at him. The demon lord was shocked to see him there, as he believed Nifix had perished with his master 1,000 years ago. Nifix tried to attack Roselia again, but Leonis shocked him by using an ice spell to counter his fire spell. He then asked Nifix what he was doing there, but before he could respond, the entire place began to shake. Nifix laughed and said it looked like Saint Tyrus had fulfilled her role as a vessel for the goddess. Leonis asked which goddess he was referring to, but Nifix refused to tell him and opened a portal to leave. The last thing he said before the portal closed was that the world was destined to crumble at the hands of the goddess. After the portal closed, the quakes began again, and Leonis saw the symbol of the sacred order shining in the sky. Before he could make sense of it, the skeletons suggested they vacate the building. When they got outside, they saw giant remains of Tyrus rising from the power plant. William explained that she was the Void Lord they had warned them about, and as they watched, the void angels that circled her chanted the hymn of the sacred order. When Tyrus began moving, the voids swooped down and attacked Leonis and the others, but they fought them off. Unfortunately, each void they destroyed regenerated because of Tyrus's regeneration ability, making things harder for them until Leonis directed them to smash the heads. At the same time, the voids attacked the girls, and the same thing happened until Elfini analyzed the void and discovered their heads were their weaknesses. She then sent out her drones to locate a vehicle which they could use to get to Roselia and Leonis, and when she found one, the 4 of them rushed to it. On the other side, Roselia and the skeletons kept smashing void heads, but Leonis decided to get rid of Tyrus to end everything. He hit her with a high-level fire spell, which was as hot as the sun, but because of her regenerative ability, she was unharmed. In retaliation, she activated a level 11 spell, which burned everything it touched, including her voids, but Leonis protected his group with an equally high-level barrier. When her reign of destruction halted, Leonis removed the barrier and asked Roselia and the skeletons to watch his 6 while he ended things. He pulled out his demon sword and floated into the air so he could have a better chance to hit Tyrus with Ragna Lost. However, when he prepared to do this, the sword began resonating, and the next time, he heard Roselia's voice coming from inside Tyrus's body. She asked if he was truly going to slay her with the sword she'd given him, and all Leonis could do was try to make sense of why she'd be inside a Void Lord. Eventually, he got tired and unleashed the power of his sword, but Tyrus absorbed the attack and retaliated with magical arrows. The arrows hit everything in sight, including Leonis, so he fell to the ground. Roselia tried to go to him, but stopped when she noticed Tyrus preparing another level 11 spell. Conflicted between rushing to Leonis' side and stopping Tyrus, Roselia activated the dress Leonis gave her. Using her blood as a power source, she sent a slash in Tyrus' direction, and when it hit her, she crumbled to the ground. Roselia then rushed to Leonis' side, while the skeletons protected them, and discovered that he was dying. Leonis weakly asked Roselia to drink his blood and then leave, but she refused and hugged him tightly. She then pressed her bloodied hand to his wound and began transferring blood to him. While she did that, Leonis saw the past where Roselia told him that if in the future he found her and she was something else, she wanted him to slay her with his demon sword. The old Leonis said he couldn't keep such a promise, so she told him that he should ensure that he found the real her. The next moment, Leonis opened his eyes, and after he sat up, he told himself that the fake goddess would die by his sword. He thanked Roselia for saving his life and asked her to give him a piece of her dress. Roselia cut off a piece and gave it to him, so he used it to repair his damaged shirt, since he was a classic man who hated messy clothes. When Tyrus began getting back up, he told Roselia he was going to vanquish her once and for all. The only problem was that he'd used most of the mana during the first attack and would need time to gather more. William and the other ghosts approached him and asked him to convert their souls into an energy source. They told him that if their souls weren't enough, he could use the souls of all those who died on the day of the stampede and were still trapped there. This made Leonis realize that Tyrus's resurrection ability was what allowed the ghosts to have astral forms. William pleaded with him to grant them this last wish, and Leonis said he would. But as he began gathering up the other souls, he told William he had a job for him and his friends. He summoned some skeletons and merged their souls with them so that they could stand with Roselia and fight for the first and last time. He then asked Roselia to lead them into battle and keep the voids at bay until he finished gathering all the souls to vanquish Tyrus. On the other side of the city, Alfina got the bikes to work, and Arl asked them to let her go with them, saying she had a duty to fulfill. The girls were against this, as she was wounded, but Sakuya convinced them to let her come with them. As they drove towards Tyrus, Alfina took control of Regina's bike with one of her drones so that Regina could blast the voids that tried to attack. Arl and Sakuya also fought the voids as the bikes drove down to the power plant. On Leonis' side, Roselia and the skeletons fought the voids, but Tyrus tried to intervene with her level 11 spell. Quickly, she grabbed Leonis and flew up to prevent him from getting hurt, and he told her that he needed a few more minutes. The girls soon reached a point in the road that was destroyed, but because Alfina had watched all the Fast and Furious movies, she kept driving and leaped over the gap. After they got to the other side, a void tried to attack them, but Sherry came out from the shadows and got rid of it. Leonis soon finished gathering the souls and began absorbing their energy into his sword so he could finish the job. Tyrus noticed this and tried to stop him by throwing a building at him, but Roselia cut it in half before it got close. When the sword was ready, Tyrus erected a high-grade protection barrier around her body. Leonis became worried that it would hinder his plans, however he couldn't stop and prepared to hit her with Ragna Lost. At the same time, the girls approached Tyrus from behind and Arl infused her holy sword with her mana. Regina and Sakuya also got their holy swords ready, and when they were close enough, they unleashed the power of their weapons in Tyrus. Regina and Shakuta's combined power weakened the barrier, allowing Arl's strike to hit Tyrus' side and force her to drop the barrier completely. As Tyrus held her side in pain, Leonis wondered who it was that hit her, but when Tyrus turned to face and he began hearing Roselia's voice again, he unleashed Ragna Lost on her. As Tyrus burned, Arl fainted and Roselia heard her father's voice telling her that the demon lord would return and rid the world of voids. When Tyrus disappeared completely, the ship stopped moving and all the voids disappeared. William and the other ghost bid Roselia farewell, and she asked them to say hello to her family in the afterlife for her. Soon after they departed, Roselia heard Regina calling out to her and ran in the direction her voice was coming from. As both girls embraced, Leonis stored the skeletons away in his shadow and went to join them. Elifne and Sakuya, who was carrying an unconscious Arl, also joined them. And when Leonis saw the elf hero, he was shocked. However, he schooled his features and kept quiet as the girls waved to the aircrafts that came to pick them up. On the way home, Leonis wondered what Arl was doing in that era, but his thoughts were interrupted by Roselia, who asked why he had a frown on his face. He told her there wasn't a problem, and then asked what book she was reading. She said it was a fairy tale book she'd found in her father's study about a demon lord and the hero who defeated him. When she told him some of the details of the book, Leonis argued that they were wrong, so she asked how he knew that. He said it was a wild guess, but in his mind, he was intrigued to know more about the story since it was the only thing that referred to his past. Roselia then told him that he reminded her of the demon lord from the story, which shocked him. Later, while Roselia took a bath, Leonis filled Blackus in on what happened in the Third Assault Garden. Just like Leonis, Blackus was surprised that Nefakes was there and even more surprised to learn that he was behind Tyrus, resurrecting as the vessel of the fake Roselia. Leonis said he was sure Nefakes would show up again, and when he did, he would twist his arm until he sang like a bird. Sherry then warned Leonis to be careful since Arl was around, and he ordered her to shadow Arl until she learned why the elf was in that era. Their conversation was halted by the arrival of Roselia, who asked Leonis if she could have his blood. Since Blackus and Sherry vanished when she walked in, he said yes, and she helped herself. Some hours later, Arl awoke in the infirmary, and when she realized where she was, she concluded that her mission wasn't over. She retrieved her sword from the guard room, and then blew a hole in the wall so she could escape. This led to the alarms going off, and when Leonis heard it, he went to look outside his window and told himself that his kingdom was always rowdy. Would American breathing win against magic? Let us know in the comment section. Also, check out our channel for more anime recap like this.